Hi, I'm Brian, Service Manager at Whole Latte Love, and today I'm going to show you how to fully disassemble your E61 group head for some basic maintenance.
All right.
So, we're going to start at the top here. We got the mushroom valve. As you can see on this specific machine, I have the flow control device on here. Once we get that off, I'm going to show you the difference between the different styles of mushroom valves.
We have the other two over here, so we'll take a look at those.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
So, first things first, before we start messing with the group head, safety first, always unplug your machine. If you have your machine plumbed in, make sure that you shut the water off. With the water off, you're going to want to lift up the lever and just let some of the water run out of it because it can still have back pressure in it from the plumb line. So I just let it run out for a few seconds. Now it's dripping, should be good.
Okay.
Put that back down. We're going to start off with, most of what we're going to use today is large wrenches, and we got flathead screwdriver, pliers just to make it easier to get some of the valves out from inside, a brush for scraping some of the bits and pieces off inside there.
Okay.
Today what we're going to do is we're going to replace all three of the valves inside of the group head. You can replace just the seals on these. These are brass, so removing this component to get to the seal, if you're not careful, you can just actually snap the pin.
Okay.
So I usually prefer just replacing the whole thing. It's much less of a heartache if you snap something, you can't use your machine until you get the new pieces in. So.
And you might have some wear of those brass parts from the cam or something.
Yep, especially
right?
if you haven't done this in a while and maybe you haven't been lubricating everything often. You'll get a lot of wear right on these boxy ends here. That's where your cam is actually rotating and pushing down on these, which you'll see better once I actually get this open. But that's a good place to look, even if you are planning on just replacing the seals, to inspect these areas and make sure that they're not unevenly worn or anything like that.
Okay.
So we're going to start at the mushroom and go counterclockwise.
You want to be careful, right, when you use
Yep.
those tools, you don't
Notice
mar your machine.
Notice how I keep my hand right there.
The sacrificial hand.
The sacrificial hand, yes. You know, technicians' hands. They've seen their days. So you just get a little loose, and from there you just start unwinding it. That way you don't have to keep risking your hand or your wrench.
Okay.
All right, and then the whole thing's just going to come right out like that. Okay. I'm going to set that to the side for just this moment and grab my pliers. Inside the top, you'll see we've got a little bit of water still built up in there. We're going to pull out the spring and the upper valve.
Okay.
And then once you see that out, it's going to start draining out the bottom because the lever is in the lowered position, which means the lower valves are open.
They'll just drain out. Okay.
Yep. So there's our first one right there. Now we're going to head to the middle of the group. Swing these out of the way here. You can take your flathead screwdriver. At the end of the lever here, there's a little screw cap. Just unscrew that.
Now we're doing this on a Synchronica, on the E61 on the ECM Synchronica, but this is going to be the same regardless of
Exactly, yes.
of machine type.
If there's a difference, it's very, very minute. Everything that I'm doing here today applies to any E61 group.
Okay.
So when you set this to the side, just keep an eye out. You got lock washer in there. Don't want to lose that because then this will start getting loose over time. So just make sure you hold on to all your bits and pieces there. All right. Now we can get to the encasing here. We're going to go for nut closer there to the group body. And just start unwinding.
So it was that inner one, right, that you clamped on, or doesn't it make a difference?
Doesn't make a difference, no. If you start with the outer one, it's totally fine, because if you want to replace the seals in here as well, you're going to need to separate these two. So once you get it so it's wiggling, the only thing it's keeping in there is just the pressure between the cam and the lower valve in there.
Okay.
So you want to take a side angle of what it actually looks like in there so you can see this part was just pressurized on here, and that's why it was fighting me a little bit.
Okay.
but completely normal for that to happen. So this is the cam. So when you have your lever on there, it is moving this up and down, which is what activates.
That's just sitting on there.
Yep, comes up, pushes it up. And then the spring is what pushes it back down into position onto the seal.
Okay.
So I didn't bring any seals to actually replace in here, but I will take this apart and show you what it looks like. If I pick the right wrench. Now, if you have much more slim wrenches, a lot of these are going to be easier for you. As you can see, the nuts are a little bit tight there, so I don't have a lot of meat to grab onto there, so you just got to be kind of careful. If you haven't done maintenance on your group in a while, a lot of these fittings will be much stiffer and much harder to break free. The last time that I did this one, I had to kind of vise down between these two. So it's just something to keep in mind. It's definitely a lot easier if you have skinnier wrenches.
So not unusual for these parts to be a lot tighter than what we're seeing right here.
Exactly. So once we have that out of there, you now see there's a spring and a sleeve in there. The cam, you can pull the cam out even if you haven't taken that off.
Okay.
And then there's your seal.
Okay.
So something you can do, I'm just going to keep those in there, put this back together. And a big part of what we're going to be doing today is going to be lubrication. If we don't keep everything nice and lubricated, it's going to defeat the purpose of everything we're currently doing.
Okay.
So, have that back together nice and tight. And what we're going to do is take the cam here and this shaft. Just going to make sure we get that cleaned off. You don't want to go too crazy on it. You don't want to use any like sandpaper or wire brushes or anything, because what you're going to do is affect the diameter of the shaft. And if you do that, then it's not going to seal correctly inside the lever arm. So we're going to do just a little bit of lubrication on here.
Let's talk about the lubrication, the lubricant that you're using, and
yes,
what
any
we can use.
food-safe lubricant is going to be fine. A favorite lubricant of myself for years, as well as my technicians, is Molykote 111. Stuff's really good. It stands up to heat and it stands up to pressurized water really well. So that's kind of why we tend to use that, but you don't have to use that. This stuff is a little bit pricey. You can go on, our website, you can go on Amazon, you can go anywhere and find food-safe lubricant. So the main things to look for are that they stand up to heat well and they're not water soluble.
Okay.
So now we got that on there. Obviously, you're not doing this, so you don't know, but that feels a lot better.
Yeah.
If you notice that your lever is just getting a little bit stiff in action, it's definitely time to lubricate.
Okay.
So the other part we're going to focus on here is the head of the cam. People call it the kidney, whatever you want to call it. It's a cam. You just want to make sure you get coffee residue off. You can use a little bit of Ernex, Clean, whatever you want to use, your favorite cleaning product, just to get it cleaned off a little bit. If it's nice and smooth, that's what you're looking for. Things to keep an eye out for are, you can see right here it's a little bit discolored. In that area, that's where it's actually hitting the valves.
Okay.
So those are points of wear. If that feels really rigid, then you have two options. You can use just some sandpaper, wire brush to try and smooth it out a little bit, but you don't want to go too extreme on it. If it's really bad, then you're just going to want to replace the entire cam.
Okay.
Now, same as everything else, we're just going to put a little lubricant on there. Now, mind you, you can go as in depth in cleaning this as you want. You can get it so that it's absolutely pristine. You can soak it in your Cafesa for 45 minutes or however long you want to do it till it makes it look really, really pretty. But for the sake of the video, we're not going to go too crazy.
Okay.
So now we have to move on to the lower end. So we've got this nut right at the top here. Well, top of the bottom, I should say.
Okay.
It's going to be backwards, keep in mind, so we're not going to be turning it the same way we turned the upper group. So we're going to turn it this way.
Yep.
There we go. All right. So inside here, you're going to have the infusion valve, pre-infusion valve, another spring, and another sleeve. You're going to have a little yummy water in there.
Okay.
You can back flush before you do this to kind of make everything a little bit easier for your cleaning, but it doesn't matter one way or the other. I chose not to because I didn't want to work on a hot machine. So, but you're totally fine to run the back flush on it the night before and then let it cool overnight.
Okay.
So we're going to use large wrench on this end and not as large wrench on this end. And boop.
And this may look a little different, like ECM on this machine has that really nice fitting down at the bottom there.
Yes, yep.
So some may look a little different.
The outer design can vary between manufacturers and everything, but as far as what the components you're going to find inside of it go, you got the core things. You're going to be looking for 3 valve actuators, springs for each, and some have a different style of, there's a little cap down at the bottom there. That can vary a little bit, but again, not much different. You can take that out, and you can see it's got little breathing holes there. Good place to make sure that that's all cleaned out and you don't have any buildup in there.
Okay.
All of this stuff you're totally fine to throw into Cafesa. The only thing that I would say is if you're throwing the outer components into Cafesa, just be very mindful of how long you let them sit in there because it can cause the coating to start to tarnish.
Okay.
So if you want to keep your machine looking nice and pretty, just be mindful of that. I usually would go no more than half an hour before I take it off, rinse it, give it a wipe down, and inspect it.
Okay.
If you need to go a little bit longer, go ahead, but just keep an eye on it. Like the turkey in the oven, we got to be careful. So this is the part where, again, you could use some Cafesa, any kind of brush or anything, get in there, scrub out.
Maybe oils and
residues
and
a little bit of. Oh, I ground a little bit too fine that one time. Yeah, you never know what you'll find in there. Maybe a gummy bear or a peanut, So, just give it a quick rinse out. Like I said, we maintained this one fairly well, so didn't have to go too ham on it. If I sat that in Cafesa for 5 minutes, it'd probably come out looking brand new. So, so today we're going to keep some of our components here. I've just recently replaced one of the springs on this. So nobody's confused. What I've done is I've taken all the components and set them out just like you would see them on an exploded parts diagram. This makes it a little bit neater and easier for you to kind of translate what I was just doing. So we've got the lower dispense spout. This is the cap that goes into there. All right. Then we have our lower spring and actuator. I'm going to go in there. Seal end up, goes straight in the middle, then just got to fight that spring a little bit. Just be careful when you're doing this that you get it at a straight angle so that you don't accidentally cross thread anything.
Now, how do you tell those springs apart?
So the lower one's easier because it's the shortest one out of the 3.
Okay.
The toss-up is going to be if you have the flow control. The flow control has an updated pre-infusion spring. It's much more, it's got much more tension in it than the style that's on a non-flow control.
Okay.
The reason behind that is because the way that the water would flow through caused a little bit extra tension, and it would cause a little bit of a vibration in there, which made a very strange sound.
Okay.
The strange sound I'm mentioning is also a good way to tell if you accidentally switch the two springs up when you're putting this back together.
Okay.
If you have the middle spring on the top and vice versa, once you have it put back together and you start trying to brew espresso, you'll hear a sound, and I'll make it for you.
I can't wait to hear this.
It's like a it's like a little dolphin sound. It's a very strange sound. You probably will never have heard this sound from your machine before. So if that happens after you've done maintenance on this, that's why. That's all you gotta do is switch out those two springs.
Switch out the springs. Okay.
Yep.
Just change position of those. Okay.
Exactly. So now what we're gonna do is get a little bit more lubricant on these ends here. You can put the lubricant on the lower part that I already put away there. It's not as important because you don't have a lot of friction. What's happening is this end of this valve is going to come down and push down a little bit on it. That's it. So it's not rubbing against it.
Okay.
But this is where we're going to get the cam rubbing on it.
Sure.
I also like to put just a little bit on the gasket itself. Kind of gives it a little bit extra protection, keeps it from getting dried out and cracked in case you're one of those people that travels frequently and likes to empty out your machine. So good idea just to have it in there. Grab my towel. So this goes right in here. The sleeve covers over the lower valve. Okay.
Okay.
And then it's going to be another one of those can we line it up situations. Before I put this in, I actually want to note, skipping parts here, I don't want to do that. While you have the top of the machine open, it's a good idea to check for any kind of scale buildup or anything in there. You can have coffee residue, you can have a little bit of scale. Keep an eye on the area right up at the top here. That's where your water is coming in from the hot end. In the thermal siphon unit, so you have the hot water coming in through here, and the cooler water is recycling through the system in the lower hole down there. Those are two areas. Any area that you have a lot of temperature transfer from hot to cold and vice versa, those are hot spots for scale buildup. So what we're going to do is just use a brush. You can use a pick if you want, a Teflon brush, wire brush, whatever you want. Just the coarser the brush you're using, the more of any coating that you have on there is going to get off, so just be careful about that. This one isn't too horrible, and again, I say I'm not going to go ham for boring you all to death. So once you
just clean those areas out.
Exactly. Once you're happy with how much you got cleaned out there, you can just do, this is just water, just
kind of rinse it.
Kind of rinse it right out. That way, everything you broke up isn't sitting in there and collecting and sitting on any of the areas that you're about to put your brand new seals on. So
we were talking about earlier, like if you see a lot of scale there, you likely have some scale in other places, right?
Yes, definitely. That's one of the first places that we'll check a machine for scale issues. Just for the sake of the subject, if you take off the bottom end of your hot water tap and look at the aerator in there, if you see a lot of scale particles in there, you're going to find a little bit here and there. But if you find a ton of big chunks in there, it's a very good indication this time to get your machine descaled. Depending on how scaled it is, you may be able to just give it a quick flush, or you may want to actually send it in for service and have a professional descale where we actually pull all the boilers out and give them real good treatment.
Okay. Okay. Well, back to our E61.
Back to our E61. It's enough from our sponsor. So it's going to come straight up in the middle there. And you're just
got to push against that spring. And
got to push against. And you don't get a lot of fight from it, but a little bit. This one's just tricky because everything's upside down.
Yeah. But once you find it, there you go.
So you get it in there, tighten it down. go.
So you're going fairly firm on that, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
You don't got to crush down too hard. You do have the Teflon seals on all of the connections here. So you had just like this, and you have it on that bottom part there. So it's between each of those threadings. You got the one here, and then on the mushroom valve, you have another one on the top there too.
Okay.
So now I like to put it in the middle before I put anything else on because it makes life a little bit easier. If you have both of the valves sticking down, it becomes a little bit more tricky. So if you come in straight with the cam facing up a little bit, you're not going to run into the valve.
Now, do you have to have that cam in any specific orientation when it goes in, or can it only go like one way?
It will only go in the right way because if you see, you've got the valve down there, and then you have this stopper right here. So that's why when you raise your lever, you can only ever get it to this position because it's hitting that stopper.
Okay.
If for whatever reason you felt squirrely and wanted to take that out, you could totally lift your lever all the way up, but I don't really recommend doing that. That'd just be a little silly.
So you just push that out a little bit?
Yeah, I just push it out a little bit. Helps you find your spot.
Okay.
And then just screwing it in is going to get it to the right position. You don't need to worry about having to mess with how far in this shaft is. It is now where it needs to be.
Okay.
Just tightening it down is going to get it in its
it
sweet spot.
Okay.
Sacrificial hand again.
There it is.
There it is. The machine appreciates it, I swear.
Yeah.
All right. So, last thing we got is the upper part. Skinny cylinder part goes up, rest drops down. It's going to wiggle around a little bit because I haven't dropped this lever yet.
Okay.
So I'm just going to reach underneath you here real quick. What you can do is just temporarily slide that on just to get it in the right position. And again, it's got only so far it's going to go because you have that stopper in there. So once you have it all the way down, that's all the way down. You're not going anywhere. So at that point, I know it's in the right position. Screw that back on. Tighten that up in a moment. Drop your spring over the top. And the last part we got here is the actual mushroom valve, as I mentioned earlier. Got the different styles here. So people are used to seeing this style, stacked nut. This has been the most common throughout the years. Profitec ECM changed their styling to look like this. This one's off of a Profitec. The ECM is a little bit taller like that, but they're very similar. So the way that both of these are designed, the way that you would take them apart is completely identical.
Okay.
I'm going to start with these ones. So on these, you need a slim wrench to be able to get into the channel here, to be able to
Undo it.
undo it. Yep, words. You can tell I spend most of my time sitting at a bench.
Talking to machines.
Yes, they don't care what I say. All right, I think I pre-loosened this one just to make it easier.
You're generally not going to get that out with just using your hands.
No, definitely not. You're going to want to use a wrench.
Okay.
The size in here is around, if you get around a 1/4 inch there, that will fit in there. Yeah.
Okay.
I just don't have any of the slimmer tools with me today, so this is what we're getting.
Okay.
So this has been a question a lot about these, so I wanted to make sure I took this as far apart as I can, just so everyone can see how it works. You take the handle off. This end of the post here is what actually holds this cap onto the top. It's not uncommon if you get a little burr inside there from the post tightening down into it, so you may need to do what I just did and just use your screwdriver, just kind of lift it up a little. Yep. So now that that's off, I can drive this down. This goes down through the nut. And you'll see inside, you've got particle screen. You'll see this on every one of these. And this is the needle. This needle goes through the jet right here. and that's what's controlling your flow.
Your flow rate.
So you got it all the way closed. That's capped off. It's not going anywhere. And then every last bit that you get it out, the more flow you're going to get out of it.
Okay.
When you're doing your maintenance on here, I do suggest doing this because there are these 2 O-rings in here. Now, if you're one of those folks that likes to experiment with your flow profile a lot, you're going to get a lot of wear and tear in here. So it's a good idea to inspect these, lubricate them, and replace as necessary. If you use the valve a lot in your daily use, it's not uncommon to want to have to replace that every year.
Okay.
Because that is getting a lot of friction on it. You also check inside these threads here. So that's just where it winds down through the top. Yeah, if you'll get just a little bit of coffee buildup, stuff like that, just whatever's coming in from the top of your machine. If you're having a lot of friction when you're trying to move your valve, inspect those. Yep.
Clean up those
I wouldn't go too heavy on any kind of lubricant. I went a little thick on the top there, and then I'm just doing that just because I want it to get into the channels. But I'm just going to lightly wipe off just what's on the top there.
Okay.
So all I've got is the lubricant now inside the threads.
Okay.
So then you can take it, drop it in, wind it back through, reassemble. Always check your screen. This particle screen is going to catch any of the little bits and pieces that are going through your system. So it's a good idea to check that on any of these regularly.
Okay.
I think one of my first videos was about servicing these mushroom valves, and it's always a point that I want to tell people. If you have a flow issue at your group head, the most likely culprit is going to be on that jet.
Okay.
Not as true with the flow control device because you got that needle basically cleaning it out every time you use it. So it's a little bit different of a story there, but on the other styles, that jet is a very, very likely spot to get built
So that
up.
screen just drops right in there?
Yep,
Okay.
goes right in there. There's nothing special, no ridge or anything that it has to sit in. Just get it centered in there. Down. Then
Now, I know from experience,
Orientate.
it's kind of important where that collar sits, because if you screw it down, you can actually stop it from totally closing off the flow.
yes. Some
You
people
want to leave a little gap.
Yeah,
right?
you want to leave a little bit of gap. So what I like to do is go down all the way and then back it off just a little bit.
Okay.
Okay. You don't need to grab your micrometer or anything like that to make sure you're absolutely perfect, but
You can
just
stick a
just a
credit
little
card
bit.
in there or something to keep a gap.
If you
or
want to,
something
yeah.
Like that.
I mean, if you want to have your
Yeah.
own calibration tool, then yeah,
Sure.
totally, yeah, that would
Sure.
work. But yeah, the idea is you just want to make sure you're not making it so that it has no flow in it whatsoever. So
All
just
right.
hand tighten that back down. Like I said, I just used my hands to open that up. You can just use a wrench, tighten that back down. This is the same as the other components that I was saying. You can just take that, put it in Cafiza if you want. If you wanted to use just like a mild citric acid or something just to clean off some of the scale dusting that you'll get in there or inside the jet area and that, that's totally fine. Just
So when
keep
you
in
had that
mind.
all apart, all those parts could have gone into Cafiza for a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Same rule of thumb, 30 minutes Cafiza. If you want to use citric acid or something like that, I'd cut that in half, maybe
Okay.
10, 15 minutes max before you want to pull it out, rinse it
Okay.
off, inspect it, make sure you're not tarnishing it.
Okay.
So that part's good to go back in. It's just going to slide right over the spring there. Again, we're going to fight the spring. Luckily, my hands are used to this, so it's not much of a fight anymore. And just wind it down until you're hand tight, and then torque it down a little bit. Usually once the machine starts to try and move,
tight enough.
that's how you know you're tight enough. When you actually turn the machine back on and start letting water come through it, that's when you're just going to want to keep an eye on these areas. If you do notice a little bit of leaking coming from any of those spots, just throw your wrench on it and tighten it up a little bit more. If you've done this many times and you haven't replaced the Teflon seal, it may be a good time to do that.
Okay.
So.
Okay. And now the other two mushroom styles here, they're
yes,
pretty much the same deal?
They're very similar. Excuse me.
Just a little less involved, right? Because
yes. So the new style for the PropTech and ECM comes apart exactly the same. The only difference between this and the flow control is obviously you don't have a needle valve coming through the top. This is just a cap that sits in there. The water flows through the system that way.
But you'll need that wrench on the mushroom itself to get those apart. Okay.
So now you've got backwards. So used to doing the flow controls at this point. So you get your wrench on the fat part, another wrench on the upper nut, and then just give a little push. There's another one of those spots where, depending on how often you do this or how much scale you may have inside there, that may have been harder, but this is a pretty new one, so that came apart real easy. Got your seal right there.
Yep.
Famous particle screen. And then, as you can see, you got your jet down there. So a good way to check the jet, I mean, obviously they're going through here. It's a really small hole. I can kind of see it when I look through.
Yeah.
But if you need help seeing it, if you just hold it up to
the
light, you can see a little bit of love.
Okay.
See the love?
Yeah, probably can. Yep.
There you go.
So we should see a little peak of daylight or what other light you're holding up through there.
Exactly, yep, yeah. So that's what you're looking for. You want to make sure you don't have any restrictions in the jet or either of the 4 holes that surround it. If you do, again, you can just put it in a little bit of citric acid, let it sit for about 10 minutes or so, and then it should be good. Yep. Use just like a little dental pick or something to kind of ream out in there and clean it out. Again, keep in mind that it's the jet is made of brass, so it is soft. So if you're going to ream it out, don't ream it out. Just scrape it out a little bit. Yeah. Otherwise, you might make that jet a little wider, which is going to affect flow rates and you know, other sciencey stuff. So just be gentle.
So putting it back together then after you got it cleaned out, just pretty straightforward.
Exactly. Yep. Just pop the screen back in there. Top nut over that. Tighten down, and that's that. The only other thing that I'll mention, something to keep an eye on when you're doing all of this, is the seal right here. You can change that. Comes off very easily, just a flathead or a pick or whatever. So I'll have to redo the job I did on your machine, Mark, because I didn't lubricate that. I always want to make sure you lubricate that too. Not because it's an area of wear, but just because it prolongs the life of it. Keeps it from drying out, getting cracked up. So, that's about all there is. Once you're done putting everything back together, like I said, you're just going to want to plug it in, turn your water back on or fill your reservoir, lift the lever, make sure you got water running through there. Then you can throw on your blind portafilter and check to make sure you have no leaks coming from anywhere. If you don't see any leaks, then you're good to rock and roll.
If you get that odd noise, right?
If you get that little...
I want to hear what... There it is.
There you go. Yeah, you get that noise, just keep in mind, you're going to have to open it back up and swap those 2 springs out.
All right. Brian, thanks so much for taking us through the maintenance of the E61.
My absolute pleasure.
All right.